Well, yet another fun time. This is a 2007 4runner. I did quite a few other little jobs on this, but maintenance stuff. The main thing is this alternator. So the dead giveaway, pretty easy diagnosis. Customer called and said his 19-year-old son drives this, and he had a whole bunch of lights on the dash. And I asked, check engine light? He said, no, all the other lights except the check engine light. So I request he send a picture. It all started with the battery light. So the battery light means that the voltage is too low, which is basically, while it's running, never going to be the battery. If you turn the key on, you'll have a battery light. But once you start the engine, the alternator should pick up the system voltage and the battery light should go out. His never went out. So the customer, he's a pretty smart guy, but he saw the battery light, so he went and got a brand new, like $200 battery and put that in, and the battery light was still on, and that's when he called me. So the real down and dirty diagnosis on this job was just very simply the battery was here, putting my meter on there, and by the time I put the meter on there, it was 11.9 volts. While running, it should never, ever be at that voltage, and it was 11.9, 11.8, 11.7. So basically, while the engine was running, all these systems were discharging the battery. That's the reason the battery light was on. So there's a little bit more to the diagnosis. If you really want to know for sure it's an alternator, these terminals here are what control the voltage regulator aspect of the alternator. On something like this, 2007, and probably a little older, and definitely everything newer, this is controlled by the ECM, the engine control module. So it's computer controlled. Technically, if you had an open circuit between one of these and let's say the source of voltage or the ECM, that could cause the concern. So just because the battery light's on doesn't 100% guarantee it's the alternator. The other thing is, when the alternator is spinning and it's getting the signals from the ECM, it'll make, like 13.5 to 13.9 or 14 volts. That should be discharged on this terminal. From here, and you can see what that wire actually looks like. It's down here. I got it. It's a little bit buried. This little guy down here. So that one goes into the harness, and then it's going to end up in this fuse box, and it'll have a big fuse, like a hefty one. It'll say ALT, probably for alternator or generator. Technically, that fuse could be blown. That fuse doesn't really blow unless somebody does something crazy wrong, like jump starts the car backwards with the positive-negative switched or something. So realistically, we see alternators fail on a regular basis. The local O'Reilly's Auto Parts, AutoZone, Napa, everybody had this in stock. They don't stock the fuse, so that kind of tells you, like, if you don't have a whole lot of expertise, you got a really good chance of fixing it with an alternator. So, was that. Mostly I want to walk you through this job. It's not hard. It's a little tricky. First, you got to get the belt off. And the belt is way down in here. I've already got mine off. The tensioner is, I'm going to zoom in on it here, that thing. That round thing is the belt tensioner. So if you get a 14 millimeter and you're going to turn the 14 millimeter counterclockwise, and that's going to release the tension on the belt. So if you hold it up counterclockwise pretty much as far as it'll go, what I like to do is come over here and slip the belt off of this pulley right on the left. I'll slip the belt off of there, and that'll give me some slack. Then if you're just doing an alternator, you could really just pull the belt over to the side and pretty much do the job. But this customer's belt was pretty shot, so here's the new belt. The belt's completely off. On this 1gr 6-cylinder, and this came on tons of these types of cars. FJ Cruiser, 4runner, Tacoma, etc. You can get the belt off without taking the fan off, but you have to basically undo the whole belt and then slip it around the edges of the fan to get it all the way off. It's kind of a pain. When I put it back together, I'll do my best to show you the belt routing, which pulleys which direction. Say you get the belt off. And I guess you could pull the battery terminal first. You really want to pull this negative terminal. You pull the negative terminal off, preferably before the positive terminal, simply because you put a wrench on the positive terminal and you touch something that you made a short. If you pull the ground first, now all this metal stuff is that's the reason. It's not because electrons get mad at you or leak or something. It's just to be less likely to short your wrench out. That's it. Then there's actually this customer had already pulled the hold down. So I think the hold down was a couple hooks and a couple bolts. Pull that out. I like to slide this to the side. And then right here, I find this easier to pull off. So this just goes right to the frame. That's another 10 millimeter. And then on the side of the alternator way down here, which was tough to get on the video, so I did pull it off, there's these bolt holes. There's a 10 millimeter here, a 10 millimeter here, and those are holding this wire harness. So you're going to need to pull those off. And then you'll find a little gray cover. You need to pop that off. That'll give you access to this. So if you had it right there, right? So boom, undo that 10 millimeter nut, and then disconnect this wire by squeezing, push a little pull, and if the belt's off, your alternator is now ready, except for two mounting points. Let me grab that bolt. We've got this upper one right here, which will be a 14 millimeter, and that just kind of anchors the top of the alternator to that spot. And the lower one's a little more tricky. This lower bolt is part of the reason that I figured this is easier to show one off the car. That lower bolt goes through and threads into itself in the alternator. This is a pivoting mount. So if you just loosen this up, you can pivot the alternator, but to remove it, you'll have to take the bolt all the way out. Then you got down in here, there's a little bushing, which you can see. That bushing is probably going to be pulled this way. When it does, it squeezes on the bracket, so the alternator is going to be tight. If you work it up and down and do a little side to side and a little up and down and a little side to side with both of those two bolts out, it will make it. I sometimes will try to pry it. If you're putting an alternator on and it's too tight, you know, like this bushing is pulled too far this way again, a kind of a cool trick, if you thread the bolt back in most of the way and you smack the end of the bolt with the hammer, it'll recess the bushing back in. So this one's pushed pretty far back. This one should fall on, no problem. And then installation is, and then PS, when you go to get the alternator out here, it will fit, barely, if you have this undone. That's why we undid this. If you undo this and push it down and you just sneak the alternator up right here, and it's kind of rubbing in all directions, but you can get it out. If you really wanted to, you could probably get it out the bottom if you pulled that radiator hose, but I'm not looking to deal with refilling and bleeding coolant, so this is, to me, the ticket right here. It's not a super hard job, although that bolt down here was a little tough. With an extension and a pretty big half-inch ratchet, I was able to crack that loose. And then swivels are your friend, so these are very helpful. And let me get this sucker jam back on here. All right, it's in there. I've really practiced and done my best effort to show you this belt, but it is just a mess to try to show you. So here's what you can see of the belt on this side. Show you just another view of it. Definitely tough to see. Okay, like this. The crankshaft is down in the bottom left, wraps the crankshaft and comes back to that tensioner, which is dead center, and it goes back and tucks under the fan. From the fan, you can see now the fan with that pink hub comes over a little idler around that power steering and then shoots back over the top of the fan. So that's the best I could show. I tried super hard. Now I just started this and battery light's off, so I know it's fixed. I'm gonna leave it on the charger overnight, and I gotta get the hold down from the customer. He lost one of the little hold downs, or he didn't bring it with him when he drove it over. So I got that all ready to go. Okie dokie, job's done.